Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear listeners. I hope you're all well. It is Ramadan day 13 here in the UK, and I'm sitting at the pond today with my son, with whom I recorded a podcast before as well. Sharjeel, welcome to the Pondering at the Pond series that I've been recording outdoors in this very beautiful setting. You're very familiar with it.
Yeah,
We've
course,
been
yeah.
here before together. But let me start with asking you to introduce yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Sharjeel. I'm 21, almost 22.
Almost 22.
Almost 22. And in my final few weeks of studying history and philosophy at the University of York, I think there's 9 weeks left.
Yeah.
So not long. Yeah.
It's gone fast, hasn't
8-9
it?
weeks,
It's
yeah.
gone very quickly. So a couple of days ago, if you remember, we were having a chat at Sahri, at Ramadan breakfast, about two types of behavior that we see among Muslims, and we were discussing that at the table with your brother and dad as well. And I remember your brother used the phrase, "We think we are too good for this world."
Yeah.
And that got us thinking, didn't we? So we agreed then that we would talk about arrogance and insecurity, which I think are two sides of the same coin, really. So let's start with, you telling me, recounting some of the behavior that you've seen around yourself, online or in person when you go to mosque spaces and things like that, So what is it that we see, from a young person's perspective? How do you see Muslims behaving?
One of the main things is when we go for Jannah on Friday, that's like main point number one or main example, is the masjid that we go to is in a residential area, and a very populated residential area, and it's next to the NHS building as well, so there's doctors that are coming in and out of there. And on Friday, people park their cars right outside the mosque because there is no parking, and that's fine. That's a problem in and of itself. But people will park there and they will block other people's driveways. So people have jobs to do, they have places to go, they may have emergencies, but all the time we're parking our cars in people's driveways, outside of people's driveways, and blocking their vehicles. And then what happens is that the mosque is constantly having complaints put in, but then there's nothing inside us that says, okay, the namaz is very important, but it's not you're kind of counteracting the good deed that you're doing by becoming a nuisance to someone else. And does it not occur to you that that's quite an arrogant thing to do? Is not be bothered about someone else's situation and only your own.
Yeah. And also, the little frauds that we commit. So I think the mosque was saying the other day that some people start using the disabled parking bays outside the clinic. And so they're parking their cars in the disabled parking bay, which means that if an ambulance has to come in an emergency, or if a disabled person comes in and they need to park their car, they actually can't find a parking space. And I don't understand behavior like that, because when you talk to people, they just dismiss it. And they say, well, my getting to prayer on time is more important than this serious inconvenience or harm that I'm causing. But, this is just one example. We see Muslims often take on an air of superiority, and they tend to arrogate to themselves the right to find salvation exclusively. And you see so many Muslims with these kind of, I call it religious supremacy, where we think that we're the chosen ones. Now that we've said the Shahada, we're definitely going to go into Jannah, and everybody else is condemned. And the Quran makes mention of this as well in Surah Al-Baqarah, where when Jewish people used to claim this right for themselves and say, we are the chosen ones because all the prophets have come to us, in our lineage, and that's why we will either not go to hell or we will spend very little time in there. And Allah questions them, He pulls them up and He says, on what basis are you making those claims? And I feel that we do something similar, and we say, okay, I've said the Shahada, and I'm now just going to be forgiven by God. I have a guaranteed ticket to paradise, and I can now start judging other people. And so we get all kinds of supremacist and condescending narratives about non-Muslims, don't we? I mean, it's just horrendous. I'm sure you've seen that, especially being played out on social media, this sense of superiority.
I do think the Muslim sphere on social media is quite a problem.
Yeah.
As much as it has done good and it can be good, I think there's more negativity than anything on there. That's just my opinion, at least, from what I see. But I definitely do think that the Muslim online sphere is a very condensed version of Islam, and it's a very negatively condensed version.
And there is also the day-to-day behavior, like, I know this always horrifies you when I give you this example, but when I was growing up, in many families that we knew of, because people employ servants in the house, and you would often have a maid, a young girl usually, who works for you all day. So, she serves on you hand and foot, cleans your house, gets your cooking ready, and things like that. And you basically have a very lavish lifestyle. Most middle class and upper class families are like that. But people do these things where they separate out their utensils. So they give them plastic glasses to drink from, or the chipped plate. And I know it always horrifies you, but can you imagine how that makes somebody
just
feel?
Like the movie The Help, which is about black women in American society, integrating into American society as they start to build their rights. And it's the same thing where they aren't allowed to use the same toilets, they can't use the same glasses, even though they're best friends with the people, because they're with them all day in the middle class houses, they're best friends with them, but they can't touch each other, or they refuse to be in contact with each other, and they refuse to use the same plates and even chairs.
But it's okay to raise their children.
It's okay to raise their children and have them serve them hand and foot and cook their clothes, cook their food and do the laundry, but they can't, just certain things where they divide them. Kind of just to show that you're different. You versus me sort of
and
mentality.
You're beneath us.
And you're beneath us,
So it's okay for you to serve us on our terms, but you're beneath us. So we're going to ask you to go to the outhouse and use the toilet outdoors rather than... So the toilet that you scrub inside the house, you can't use that toilet. You have to go outside the house.
You can clean it.
You can clean it, but you can't use it. And the other day I was quite horrified. I was listening to this Muslim lady who lives here in Britain, and she had cancer. She was very, very unwell, and she was in hospital, and then she had lots of rounds of chemotherapy. And you know what hospital staff are like here. They're absolutely lovely and the kindest people you come across. So compassionate. I mean, all of the National Health Service here, as we know, is so compassionate. So she was given amazing care by the doctors and nurses there. And, when you're unwell and you're vomiting in bed and you can't get up to go to the loo, people are cleaning you. People are cleaning your body, and they're giving you massages and looking after you. When she came home, a lot of people suggested to her that you're so weak, you can't manage household chores, why don't you get a cleaner? And you know what she said? She said, I'm not going to get a cleaner in because it's going to be a non-Muslim, and I'm not going to let a non-Muslim come into my house and touch the stuff in my kitchen. And I was horrified, thinking it's okay when the same non-Muslims look after you when you are at death's door and you have been that unwell and you've had multiple surgeries and chemotherapy. It's taken you over a year to get back on your feet, and yet you can't hire a cleaner because you don't want her touching.
It's like you believe there's this innate sanctity of your house.
Yes.
Like it's a
shrine,
or it's some sort of elevated house that can't be touched by other people.
And you're clean, but the other people are unclean. So this spiritual, what we do is we associate this spiritual impurity to people. One of the other really horrifying things, a friend on Facebook was saying that she lives in a village, so the whole village community gets together to do the wheat harvest, and they have Christian people living in the village, there are lots of Hindus who live in the village. So they all go out and they do the harvest, but when it comes time to share the food, the Muslims take out different plates for them, and when the women are sharing water and drinks with them, they pour the water from a height into the pitcher.
So it doesn't get near it.
So it doesn't get near it. It's like some kind of impurity or contamination will go into it. These are horrible behaviors, and if we're ever subjected to such a behavior, it will put us in a lot of pain. We would be very hurt if somebody treated us like this. And this behavior is across society. On Facebook the other day, somebody shared a photo where some Muslim people in a workplace, I don't know which workplace it was, they had put a second microwave in the kitchen, and on it there was a note saying, this is for warming up halal food only. How does that make your colleagues feel when you behave like this and you associate kind of this uncleanliness to their food or the utensils or their microwaves? And it's just horrendous behavior. So it's really arrogant behavior that we take on these kind of supremacist notions. We somehow spiritually superior.
Like when me and Shari, my brother, were living in university halls, or when we were sharing a house with our friends in year 2, we were all using the same microwave, and how would we feel if one of those if they told us this microwave is for non-halal food only because there's going to be ham and stuff being microwaved in there, and the air particles are contaminated. And then I was to turn around and say, I would be expected to turn around and think, oh, well, that's fine because that's your culture. But then we expect people to do the same thing from us.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter if we're a minority.
No.
It doesn't.
No,
I don't think if you continue living in a victim complex, then you never build any backbone and you never stand on your own two legs.
No.
So you can't turn around and say, oh, well, I'm the minority, so I win here.
Yeah.
It's a case of you're outing other people and making them feel different to you,
exactly.
which is wrong.
Yeah. And then you want preferential treatment for yourself, and you want all the exemptions. So you have this exceptionalism. So Muslims tend to carry this sense of exceptionalism around them and say, make all of these adjustments for me. And yes, some of the adjustments can be classed as reasonable, but it is not reasonable that you make other people feel like this, or you say that, I'm going to use separate utensils, or you're somehow contaminated, or non-Muslims, my child can't be friends with non-Muslims, or if non-Muslim children come into our house, they won't be allowed into the house, or we'll take out separate plates for them.
The reality is, if you wanted that to happen, you'd live in a majority Muslim country.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you choose to live in a country which is where you are the minority, you're going to have to accept the fact that you are the minority and deal with it.
Yeah. Exactly. And then, so what we do have kind of this arrogance about us, and it shows up in all of these little acts, little actions and decisions that we make, our day-to-day behavior. And it must really hurt other people. I mean, we hear stories of hurt in Pakistan, particularly from Christian minorities. Christians are in a minority there, from Hindus, from Sikhs, other non-Muslims who are treated appallingly, even to the extent that people would not let them touch things in the kitchen. I know women who would let their maids clean the bathroom, but they won't let them into the kitchen. What are you saying to that person, and what message of Islam are you giving to them, and how will they ever be attracted to Islam if you treat them like this?
How can you talk about self-righteousness and equality and mercy when you don't have any of those three qualities yourself?
Exactly. And you're not willing to accord basic dignity to other human beings. So you demand that dignity for yourself because you have that exceptionalism. You demand that dignity for yourself, but you're not willing to give that dignity and respect to other people. Now Allah warns us very strongly and says, do not be arrogant and proud, and that arrogance seals our hearts and it makes us cruel and unable to discern between what is good and what is evil, and what is rational and what is irrational. And in fact, Allah tells us that hellfire is a place of the arrogant, this is the criteria that Allah is going to use to punish people, is if they're arrogant. So if it's okay, I'm going to read out a few verses just for our listeners here. So one is from Surah Az-Zumar, which is chapter 39, verse 72, where Allah says, to them will be said, enter ye the gates of hell, to dwell therein, and evil is this abode of the arrogant. And so Allah is defining hell as the abode of the arrogant. And then in Surah Ghāfir, which is chapter 40, verse 35, he says, such as dispute about the signs of Allah without any authority that has reached them, grievous and odious is such conduct in the sight of Allah and of the believers. Thus does Allah seal up every heart of arrogant and obstinate transgressors. And then in Surah An-Nisa, which is chapter 4, verse 173, he says, but to those who believe and do deeds of righteousness, he will give their due rewards and more out of his bounty. But those who are disdainful and arrogant, he will punish with a grievous penalty, nor will they find besides Allah any to protect or help them. And Surah Luqman, now Luqman obviously gives lots of advice, wise advice and words of wisdom to his son. So he's in dialogue with his son, and he says, and swell not thy cheek for pride at men, nor walk in insolence through the earth, for Allah loveth not any arrogant boaster. So we're not even allowed to walk in insolence, be insolent towards the people. And insolence is this behavior, distancing yourself from others, considering others to be, God forbid, contaminated as if they're the children of a lesser God, not sharing food with them or making faces and what is that word you use, cringe?
Yeah, it's just cringe. I don't really know, I don't think there's a word that kind of encapsulates it in another way, but it's behavior that kind of just sends a shiver down your spine because it's that bad.
It is that bad,
and it's that kind of like get over yourself sort of thing. Such a strange mentality.
It is a strange mentality. So I've thought of a terminology for it today, which is I'm going to coin the term Ibleesism. Because I think this is the behavior that Iblis exhibited. And the first sin, of course, that we hear of in Surah Al-Baqarah when Allah is talking about the story of creation is Iblis' arrogance. So he's told to bow to Adam and he refuses to. Now, interestingly, then, there is more detail about it in Surah Al-Araf in chapter 7, verses 12 and 13, where Allah actually engages in this dialogue with Iblis. So Allah says, "What prevented you from prostrating when I commanded you?" He said, "I am better than he." So I'm better than Adam. "Thou did create me from fire and him from clay." So Allah says, "Get you down from this. It is not for you to be arrogant here." So you can't be arrogant in paradise. "Get out, for you are of the meanest of creatures." So Allah is basically saying that there is no place for arrogant people in paradise and they will never get the nearness to Allah. So to be near to God, we have to be humble people, humble and kind, exercise humility. Even when Allah talks about looking after parents, he says, lower your wing of mercy, be merciful towards them, and lower to them a wing of humility. Humility, because one day we will also be old and frail. So, be mindful of that.
It's interesting just to note that this is like, from my recollection at least, this is one of the first stories as a young Muslim that you're introduced to about Islam, like directly from, as in a teaching, not just a story of the Quran or about Islam, but as a teaching. This is something that you can directly learn from, and it's something which is quite a basic concept.
Exactly.
Is to not be arrogant.
Yeah.
And the fact that we managed to forget this in, just my lifetime of 20 years, I've seen the whole sphere change online. And the dynamic has changed entirely to being arrogant and bringing other people down.
Exactly, it is. And it's not just the non-Muslims, and this is the second thing I wanted to turn to, is all of the bullying that we do in Muslim spaces, right? So we feel very insecure, and I think we feel insecure because we berate it all the time. So, you mentioned the Friday sermons, right? So you go to your Friday khutbah, and what happens? The Imam is stood there, or the Khatib is stood there, and he just tells you off.
Me and Babu were in utter disbelief. We just kept looking at each other, and we were like, this is a Friday sermon,
Nothing inspiring?
Nothing inspiring, and nothing to rejoice in this special day either. There was nothing to be proud. They were kind of telling us there's nothing for you to be proud of. It was just after the New Year, and they were saying, how can you wish yourself Happy New Year when you haven't achieved enough and you haven't achieved anything because you missed one prayer or two prayers, because you haven't donated enough to charity. And you're sat there thinking, this is a lovely start to the year.
Exactly.
You're just being told off for things that you either did do or didn't do.
Yeah.
And we bring those problems to the surface, and that's what we complain about.
Yeah, and it's always the small things. So, you're now trying to be like Westerners. That's the other thing, the politics of distinctiveness, as I call it, them versus us. So we're different from them. They wish each other Happy New Year. We're not going to wish each other Happy New Year because it's some kind of sin to do that. So you're told off for celebrating New Year. Let's put it in quotes, celebrating New Year. And then you're told off that you're not a good enough Muslim. You never say your prayers. You're never in mosque enough. Isn't that something that's said a lot? That young people, particularly your generation, doesn't.
They don't spend enough time there. And it's probably because we're being told how wrong we are all the time. It's simple as that. It kind of puts you off.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm actually trying to recollect the khutbah, and I don't think that they'd mentioned one thing about being a good person or doing good deeds. Maybe they did, but it was so overshadowed by you're not enough and you never will be enough and you didn't do that much good this year, so you should do better or give up. So
exactly. And then everything being picked on, how you sit, how you eat, what clothes you're wearing. I mean, clothing particularly, appearance is something we pick on so much, and we bully people all the time on social media, don't we?
Yeah, that's the Muslim online kind experience is just being bullied. Is that this is wrong about you, that's wrong about you, this post has this in it, so it's unacceptable.
Or a woman wearing acrylic nails.
She's cooking iftar, but she's wearing acrylic nails, so why is she bothering? Don't bother fasting at all, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because now you're wearing acrylic nails. And I think that some of that insecurity is actually driven by our sense of not being good enough. So when you look at some of the dynamic, particularly when the Reformation is happening and the way the church conducted itself. So we know that church was a hegemonic power. They controlled taxation. They had huge political clout.
Yeah.
Islam doesn't have a church, fine. So we don't have an institution to
like
rail
a governing
against.
body.
They were like a governing body. But also, all of Christianity stood on this idea of guilt, the original sin. Now, Islam does not have that concept. Allah says that we are created on fitrah, that we are created as good people, as positive people. But what the community does is that it puts that burden of guilt on you. So you are always wrong. You're not good enough. They're always picking on you. I have been picked on for how I say my prayer, for example. This is not how women say their prayer. By the way, there's no difference in prayer between men and women, but you picked on, this is how the women should not be praying like this. Or you're standing up very tall for yourself. You should keep your head down when you walk in public. And guys are told off for but your trousers are below your ankles, or your beard is not a good enough length. And it's this constant bullying happening all the time. And so I was thinking of a word that Generation Z use a lot, which is mid. I think we're always mid believers, aren't we?
I
just
think
never
it's
good
actually
enough.
below mid.
Is there such thing below mid?
Because it feels like there's very little that you're doing right, as opposed to a lot that you're doing wrong. I think it's the first one, is that there's very little that you're actually doing which is considered right.
So what kind of things have you guys been picked on in terms of doing wrong?
No, that's what I mean is, for example, that Friday khutbah, there was actually very little they were saying that you're doing wrong, but it was a case of there's not much that you're doing right. So you're in this kind of limbo state of, well, you can never do enough right. Like when we were in the same mosque there, and they had I think we talked about this in the last podcast maybe, but they had those hands on the wall, where the kids had written the class rules in there, and the rules were all about the hierarchy of the imam, the teacher, but absolutely nothing to do with learning. It was just class rules basically.
Don't say this, don't
say
that,
this, don't do that. So you're doing a lot wrong, but you're not seeming to do a lot right.
No. And so we always in the court of judgment of other people. And because this is what Muslims do, we've taken upon ourselves the remit of judgment, whereas actually the prerogative only sits with Allah. Only Allah can judge. And so these behaviors are two sides of the same coin, I feel. We feel very insecure as a community. I think the fact that we also can't quite make sense of the world we live in, the challenges of modernity, we're quite cut off from our own history, our own sense of self. We feel adrift. Not really sure of who we are and what we're meant to do now in the world and for the future. And we pick on each other, so our community spaces are very toxic, and there is collective bullying going on basically. And as a woman, I tell you, I face this every day. I think we face more of it than guys do, to be honest. But then when we're talking to other people who are non-Muslims, we also have certain arrogant behaviors and conduct and very condescending way of behaving towards other people, and it's such a worry. And it goes completely against the Quran. It's actually one of the worst sins to commit, is to be arrogant, and it's not something that's going to be forgiven by Allah.
And this is something in philosophy which is talked about a lot, because in the mind and morality modules and ethics modules they talk about arrogance quite a lot and personal interest. And there's a philosopher that we're doing right now called Johann Gottlieb Fichte, and he says, I think it's in his paper Vocations of a Scholar, he says that if we don't know what the vocation of a scholar is, we must know the vocation of a man. And he says all man needs to do in life is to elevate other men. That's your only goal. Elevate other men in any way possible, whether that is charity, for example, or showing mercy towards someone, or just showing someone how to do something correctly, helping others, teaching. Your only job as a human being is to elevate man. But that seems to be quite an intrinsic value, I think, as humans, because he also says in another paper, Foundations of Natural Right, which is that our biggest strength is community. As humans, because animals don't have this, as humans, our biggest strength is community, and we should bind together and build communities and build those friendships and those relationships that elevate each other. And this is the exact opposite which is happening. And I think he actually goes on to call it quite a virus. It's an infection of the human mind, which is arrogance, and it destroys the communities and destroys relationships that could actually better everyone, not just Muslims.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we could build a system which is really, really positive, and other people can find positivity from that. and find the love that we can share from that. But I don't think that we do that anymore.
No, because we're too caught up in our notions of supremacy. That is the problem. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because actually in the next episode I'm going to pick up the expectations that Allah sets of a believer, the character traits that He expects believing Muslims to portray. And one of those is, central to that is the thing you said, elevating others, this idea of public service. And if we're going to do public service, we need to be humble. When you're arrogant, you actually cannot see other people's pain, because you're too caught up in your own notions of supremacy and telling yourself all the time how wonderful we are, which is what I see. Muslims keep telling themselves, oh, but we have this amazing religion, and look how wonderful we are. We are the guided ones, but our behavior is absolutely appalling.
I see it through the language of we are the believers and they are the disbelievers.
Yes.
It's called Muslims and non-Muslims.
Exactly.
I find with that language dynamic, you're very much saying is, oh, they don't believe and they don't get it.
Yeah, they
and
don't.
we get it. It's kind of like this, I understand this whole thing and you don't.
You don't, yeah. And yet most people that I know of, or non-Muslims, are very humble people. And the most amount of arrogance and vile behavior that I've seen is actually from the Muslims.
I see it with my friends are fantastic people, but my Muslim friends are so busy caught up about their beard lengths and wearing a jubba, and I don't want to marry this girl because she doesn't wear hijab, and it's like, fine, man.
Yeah.
Like,
fine.
enjoy. You're clearly not enjoying life, but enjoy it. Because my non-Muslim friends are, enjoying their lives and they're being great people.
Yeah.
They're great to their parents, they're great to their families.
Yeah. And humble. It's that thing.
Yeah.
It's the way people walk, the way people carry themselves. Even the Quran, by the way, mentions that you don't walk with insolence. Even your walk, your the way you sit, the way you talk to other
Because
people.
arrogant people walk in arrogance. They really do, and you
They
can
really do.
you can see it
tell.
from a mile away.
Yeah.
And that's what puts you off from some people.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a general behavior. Towards each other, we're little gods. We judge each other. And towards non-Muslims, we're just arrogant and condescending, because we believe that we're the guided ones. And that is exactly, as I said, what Allah points out right at the start in Surah Al-Baqarah, and says, on what basis do you make these claims that you're the chosen ones? I decide who is the chosen one, and I decide who's going to be deserving of my pleasure, and that's going to be for people who are pious and who care for other people. And inshallah, that's what I'll turn to. So I'm just going to sum up with a key reflection, which is what I've been doing this series, is always kind of leave a point to ponder as we sit next to the pond. So my reflection for today really is that hell is the abode of the arrogant. And arrogance and pride are consistently condemned in the Quran. For me, arrogance is Ibleesism. When you're arrogant, you are absolutely following in the steps of Iblis, who said that he was superior to Adam. And he had his own reasoning.
I really think calling it Ibleesism is very, very good, because it should strike fear in a Muslim.
Yeah.
Being compared to Iblis, because he went straight to hellfire.
Yeah, he will, because of what he said, and what
he
did
was
pick
cast
up?
out. You know,
Was cast out.
this should really, really make you think. Okay, I want to be as different from him as I can possibly be.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're portraying yourself as an arrogant individual, then you're clearly doing something wrong.
Exactly.
Because it takes a lot to be arrogant.
Yeah, it does. But people don't realize that, because Allah also says in the Quran that He puts a seal on your heart.
Yeah.
So because you're arrogant, you actually lose that self-awareness of how you're being perceived by the people and how your conduct is harming other people. And so it is Ibleesism. And Iblis's logic was, well, I'm made of fire and he's made of clay. And actually, that is very racist logic, isn't it? And that's what we see all around us. So Muslims can never, ever be racist. So arrogance is Ibleesism. And I think we have to learn as a community to leave judgment to Allah. We have to learn to leave judgment to Allah. This is where again and again we trip and we fall. We take on the remit that is not ours. So we have to abandon any notions of religious supremacy. We don't know who is going to find salvation. In fact, Allah points out to the Jewish people, as I said, on what basis have they arrogated to themselves the opinion that they will be forgiven by Allah. Us Muslims are doing the same, and we have arrogated to ourselves the exclusive right to salvation. That's how we conduct ourselves, especially with non-Muslims, that we exclusively, the saved ones. And we go around judging people, Muslims or non-Muslims. And then we put our chipped plates for our domestic servants and religious minorities living in our neighborhoods. These are people who live next door to us.
Because the tragedy is there are so many good Muslims in this world. Yeah. I mean, you can't even count it, how many amazing Muslims there are in this world. But they're just being ruined by this portrayal of arrogance, which we see mainly in the online world. Because I think we just need to understand that what we post online does make a difference. and you can't go online and,
No.
and start bullying each other.
No.
You know, it should be a safe space online to talk about things.
It's very
but
toxic.
it's very much the opposite.
Yeah, it is. And so the antidote, I mean, if arrogance is Ibleesism, then the antidote is to become humble and for us to recognize what our remit is. And we are here to believe and to do good deeds, as you were saying, elevating other human beings, to serve humanity. And we must always tell ourselves every day that judgment only belongs to Allah. I think
And
then we can step away
just to
from
add
this
on
behavior.
one thing.
Of course you can.
You know, the title is Too Good for This World. We need to understand that we are put in this world.
Yeah.
And it is a test, but you're not too good for it. You have to take it in your stride. This is the planet you've been put on. You don't have a maths paper put in front of you and say, oh, well, I'm going to score 99, so I don't even need to care about it. I'm going to scribble all over it and make it difficult for the examiner. That's not what you do. So we need to understand that this is the world that we have been put in, and this is a blessing. And having working hands and a brain and a body and be able to experience the world that we've been put in is also something that we should be thinking about, and not considering that we are too good for it and that we're, I'm guaranteed heaven.
Exactly. Or to good for other people who live in this world, the other communities, the other tribes,
because they've
other
also
nations,
been put on
other
this
ethnicities,
earth.
other races have also been put on this earth. And by us believing that, oh, we're too good for this world and this world is only fitna, it's only temptation and I must turn my face away from it, we develop this kind of really contradictory, warped, awkward attitude to our own reality that we live in, rather than, as you're saying, embracing it and embracing all of its diversity and everything that all people bring to this world, in our collective shared humanity. But you're right, that's how we conduct ourselves, that we're too good for this world, we're too good for the societies that we live in, and that exceptionalism drives our arrogant behavior. But sitting behind that exceptionalism is a sense of insecurity. We are very insecure and defensive and belligerent as a community, and that's why we turn our guns on everyone, metaphorically speaking, and that's why we behave like such bullies with other
I'd
Muslims.
call it an ecosystem of bullies, because bullies are very insecure, fundamentally very insecure people, and they project those insecurities on others, and that's exactly what we do.
Exactly.
We just project our insecurities on other people.
And they're out to get us.
Yeah.
So that is what happens when you're insecure and you have a victim mentality. This is how you behave towards other people, whilst all the time talking about the superiority of your ideas and the superiority of your religion. And this is what alienates people, and we should not be doing that. So lovely. I've really enjoyed this, actually, having you at the pond as well, and having this conversation. Nice set of reflections for our fast today. And inshallah, more of this. I know you and I have another podcast planned where we want to talk about morality and creating a better world, the big picture stuff. So inshallah, we'll do that after Ramadan is over. Thank you, Sharjeel. And we'll say assalamu alaikum to our listeners.